So first-year students, luckily this isn't your writing seminar, because that was so poorly written, wasn't it? I mean, what was the theme? I mean, there were so many things that were being said, and they're all contradictory. Yet again. And did you hear the real killer statement, which was actually very clear, that the master praised his dishonest steward, the steward who cheated him. He praised him for being prudent. Or this dishonest steward, sometimes it's said, it's translated unjust or even evil. But I also like the variations for prudent, sometimes translated wisely, shrewdly. I think I've seen a crafty in there at one point, which kind of connotes a little bit of underhandedness, doesn't it? And then there's clever. Whatever it is, this dishonest steward, he used what God had given him to cheat his master so that he'd have a place to go and be able to thrive, or at least survive, after he got dismissed, which I think maybe he didn't then once he started really going crazy and acting dishonestly. It sounds like the landowner might have kept him on. This is one of those, especially that commentators like to apologize for, make excuses for. Well, you know, this steward, sometimes there was a setup where the steward could charge, a certain amount of money so that the steward would make a profit. So as long as he was giving the owner what was his due, he could change how much he was asking of these various people, right? He could lower his profit margin. He could take less. But it doesn't seem like that's what was going on here. He's called a dishonest steward. And then in this whole mishmash of varying, sometimes contradictory one-line lessons at the end of this passage, one of them is, make friends with dishonest wealth. So it seems like we're being called to use our heart and our brains, to be innovative in the way we seek to reconcile with one another. How sometimes you just feel like you're hitting your head up against the wall trying to solve a problem in life, maybe trying to reconcile with somebody. Maybe there's some other way, some clever, even crafty way of approaching this problem. Ever have a hard time making time to pray? Maybe there's some way we haven't thought of yet, some clever way to see how we look at our day. And I'm so glad we've got some new students and others here today. I hope that as you get busier with school, you keep being clever about finding ways to come to the feast on Sundays. There's clever ways that we can and that people have approached peace. How many have seen the movie The Butler yet? Really good, huh? Really powerful. And you get, one aspect of it is the cleverness, the shrewdness of the nonviolent movement during the 60s in pushing for justice for African Americans. So clever, this whole nonviolent movement, which seeks to disarm people not with bigger weapons, but by laying weapons down. And it's a way that's been very successful in other parts of the world on big and large scales. Now, you might have noticed the first reading was, and also Julie's great introduction, was about the importance of reaching out to those who are poor. The first reading talking about the rich abusing the poor. And you might have noticed that in one of these little one-liners towards the end of the gospel passage, there was a bit about, encouraging us to, I'm forgetting the line, but it had, again, to do with not seeking riches. Well, and then the final punchline was, you cannot serve both God and mammon, God and money, God and material things, possessions. So let's take a look a little bit about how can we be clever with the fact that there are poor in our midst. In fact, how can we be clever about addressing the issue that, yes, still, in our society, the rich are getting richer, which is fine, except that the poor are getting poorer. And sometimes the rich are getting richer at the expense of the poor. Everyone, our Catholic Church teaches us, has a right to adequate health care, education, shelter, food, a right to access to work, to labor, and a right to a living wage for our labor. That a person shouldn't, if they're working, they should be able to provide for themselves and for their family. Tricky, huh? Here's the challenge as it comes from St. Ambrose, and there's similar challenges through the centuries by some of our great theologians. Here's what St. Ambrose said so many centuries ago. You are not making a gift of your possessions to poor persons. You are handing over to them what is theirs. For what has been given in common for the use of all, you have taken for yourself. So how can we be clever about reaching out to those who are poor, working towards always less and less poverty in our midst? We can study the wealth, so to speak, of church teaching about the poor, about wealth, about labor. We can find little and big ways of making our society more justice, not losing the right for labor workers, for example, to organize. Clever about how we respond to people who say things like, well, but we can't help the poor because the market has to be free. And there's rules to the market. It's just that the rules tend to favor us who are on the richer side of things. And or things like, we have to level the playing field, which can come from people who are very concerned for the poor. But ultimately, that even misses the point. It's not a playing field for the poor. It's not a competition for those who are looking for a meal, for a place to live, right? We want not just them to have a chance to fight for a place to live, we want them to have a chance to, with dignity, to have a place to live. We want them to have what is theirs. There's so many problems in the world and in our personal lives that require a little cleverness, right? Maybe even a little craftiness. And with that Christian craftiness and a sense of prayer and faith, there's so much we can do. As one on our student ministers retreat just this morning said, this year I want us to change the world. And there's problems, but not too many that we can't make a difference.